In the small town of Charleston, South Carolina, where the air always carried a salty breeze from the nearby coast, life for Michael Carter was anything but easy. At 30 years old, he had grown used to the sound of clanking wrenches, squeaking, garage doors, and the frustrating sight of overdue bills stacked on his workbench. His garage, though humble and dusty, was his world, a place where he fixed cars that barely paid him enough to get through the month. The walls were lined with mismatched tools, many of them rusty and older than him, but he kept them alive with patience and creativity. Michael's life was one of survival, not comfort. He rarely treated himself to anything beyond the basics. Lunch was often a simple sandwich wrapped in old newspaper, and nights were spent working under the harsh glare of a single light bulb that buzzed above him. Yet for all the struggle, he was never bitter. His heart carried a quiet kindness that many people in town knew well. When neighbors couldn't pay, he would fix their cars anyway. When someone's tractor broke, down in the middle of harvest season, Michael was the one they called at midnight. That rainy evening, thunder rolled across the sky, rattling the thin garage roof. Michael had just finished tightening the bolts on an old pickup truck when he heard an unusual sound, outside tires crunching against the gravel in the heavy downpour. He wiped the sweat and grease from his forehead, wondering who could be visiting. At such a late hour, his small garage rarely attracted wealthy customers, especially not ones driving sleek, luxury vehicles. And yet, as the headlights cut through the rain, a glossy black SUV slowly came to a stop in front of him. The door opened, and out stepped a woman whose presence immediately seemed out of place in his dusty world. She was tall, elegant, her designer suit clinging perfectly despite the storm. Her dark hair was tied neatly, and diamond earrings caught the faint light of the garage. She moved quickly, almost frantically, toward the back seat of the SUV. Michael noticed how her hands trembled as she opened the door and gently lifted out a small figure. It was a young girl, about 11 years old, wrapped in a pink jacket, her pale face framed by damp strands of hair. The child's legs looked fragile, almost lifeless, as the woman carried her inside. Michael stepped forward, confused but alert. The storm outside only made the scene feel more urgent. He glanced at the girl, then at the back of the SUV, where he spotted a wheelchair, its frame bent. Wheels crooked and seat nearly torn apart. He had seen broken machines in his life, but this one carried more than just metal and bolts. It carried a child's freedom, her chance to live beyond the confinement of four walls. The girl's eyes met his for a moment. They were soft, hopeful, but also heavy with years of disappointment. "Can you help us?" The woman's voice trembled, breaking slightly under the weight of desperation. "Her chair, it's completely broken. We've tried everything, every specialist, every company. They all promised comfort, but nothing has worked. She deserves better. Please, can you fix it?" She was no ordinary customer. Michael could see it in her clothes, her guarded tone, and the way she held herself. This was a woman used to power and wealth, yet at that moment she looked as fragile as her daughter. Michael walked closer, his boots echoing softly against the wet concrete floor. He crouched beside the wheelchair, his skilled hands running along its bent frame. Years of experience fixing cars and broken machines gave him an instinct, and instantly he knew this chair had been poorly designed, patched together with little thought for the child who relied on it. But as he studied the damage, his eyes shifted back to the girl. She sat silently in her mother's arms, her small hands gripping her jacket, her lips pressed together as though afraid to hope again. "What's your name?" Michael asked gently, lowering his voice so it didn't sound like an interrogation. The girl's eyes brightened a little as she whispered, "Emily." The name lingered in the air, soft and innocent, carrying with it all the weight of her struggles. Michael felt his chest tighten. He wasn't looking at a broken machine anymore. He was looking at a child's life, at dreams put on pause by failed promises and mechanical flaws. He knew then that this wasn't just about repair. This was about giving Emily a chance to feel human again. Victoria Hayes, the mother, set her daughter down carefully on a chair nearby. Her face was pale but determined, her posture still carrying the authority of a woman who had built empires. Yet her eyes betrayed her, a mother's eyes that had wept countless nights, searching for hope that never came. "They told me nothing more could be done," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Every doctor, every engineer, every so-called expert. They all failed her. She deserves freedom, even if it's just in the smallest ways." She hesitated, then added softly, "You're my last hope." Michael inhaled slowly, feeling the gravity of the moment press against his chest. He could almost hear the storm outside, sinking with the pounding of his heart. He had no fancy education in biomedical engineering, no million-dollar lab filled with high-tech equipment. All he had were his hands, his tools, and his determination. But sometimes he believed that was enough. He turned his gaze back to Emily, whose wide eyes searched his face for an answer. For a moment, neither spoke, yet something passed between them, a silent promise, a flicker of trust. Finally, Michael broke the silence. He reached out, resting a steady hand on the wheelchair's frame, then looked directly at Emily. His voice was calm, but filled with conviction. "I'll do more than fix it," he said firmly. "I'll make it better." His words weren't just reassurance, they were a vow. Emily's lips curved into the faintest smile, a fragile but powerful spark of belief returning to her. Victoria exhaled shakily, a tear slipping down her cheek as she pulled her daughter closer. For the first time in years, she saw a stranger who didn't pity them, didn't give excuses, but simply believed. The storm outside raged on, but inside that little garage, something extraordinary had begun. A mechanic with nothing to his name had taken on the responsibility of giving an 11-year-old girl her hope back. And though none of them realized it yet, that night would mark the beginning of a journey that would change all of their lives forever. Days blurred into nights as Michael Carter devoted himself to the project with a fire he had never felt before. His garage, once just a place of survival, now became a workshop of hope. He studied diagrams late into the night, scribbling sketches on crumpled paper, his calloused fingers smudged with graphite. He ordered spare parts online, using money he didn't really have, convincing himself he would figure it out later. Every corner of the garage was covered in scraps of metal, wires, bolts, and strange little mechanisms that only he could make sense of. This was no longer just work, it was purpose. Emily began visiting almost every afternoon, her mother driving her to the small-town garage, despite her doubts. At first, she only watched from her chair, quiet and reserved, unsure if Michael's efforts would be any different from the countless specialists who had disappointed her. But as the days passed, her shyness gave way to curiosity. She leaned forward in her chair, asking questions about the tools he used and the strange contraptions scattered around. Her once muted world seemed to awaken in that dusty garage. Michael noticed the spark in her eyes and made it his mission to keep it alive. For the first time in years, Emily laughed freely. Her giggles filled the air like sunlight breaking through a storm. She laughed when Michael dropped a wrench on his foot, when sparks flew unexpectedly from a test motor, and when he pretended to argue with the stubborn screws that wouldn't fit properly. That laughter became music to him. It reminded him that this was more than building a chair. It was building a life. Every squeak of the garage door, every hum of his welding torch seemed to pulse with new energy. The place that once echoed with loneliness now glowed with hope. Victoria often stood by the doorway, arms crossed, watching in disbelief. She had seen some of the finest engineers in the country try and fail to create something comfortable for Emily. Their designs were sleek, expensive and cold, never fitting the heart of what Emily needed. Yet here was a poor mechanic, a man who could barely afford his own meals, pouring every ounce of himself into building something no amount of money had bought her. It shook her. Late one evening, when Emily had fallen asleep in the car, Victoria lingered inside the garage, her voice trembling as she asked, "Why are you doing this? You barely even know us." Michael paused from tightening a bolt and looked up, his face smeared with grease, his shirt damp with sweat. For a moment, he said nothing, as though searching for the right words. Finally, he smiled faintly, his eyes soft. "Because every child deserves hope," he answered, "and sometimes hope comes on wheels." The simplicity of his response stunned her. There was no hidden agenda, no expectation of reward. He wasn't building for recognition or wealth, he was building because it was the right thing to do. Victoria turned away quickly, blinking back tears she didn't want him to see. Each day, the wheelchair took on more form. It wasn't just repairs, Michael was reinventing it. He modified the seat to adjust perfectly to Emily's posture. Adding cushions, he stitched himself late at night. He designed wheels that glided smoothly, even on uneven ground, using scraps from old cars to create shock absorbers. Crafted lightweight handles and an electric assist system, soldering wires with precision. Every feature was thoughtful, personal, and made with Emily in mind. He didn't just want her to sit, he wanted her to feel alive. He wanted her to roll down sidewalks, laugh in the park, and feel wind in her hair like every other child. Emily noticed the difference. With each visit, she saw the chair come closer to completion, and her excitement grew. She began bringing him little drawings she made at home, crayon sketches of what her dream chair would look like. Michael pinned them proudly on the wall, promising her that he would make her dreams real. Sometimes she sat beside him on an overturned bucket, handing him tools as though she were his assistant. "You're my best helper," he'd tell her, and she'd beam with pride. The bond between them grew, quietly but powerfully, stitched together with laughter, trust, and shared determination. But behind the joy, Michael faced battles of his own. Each part he ordered put him deeper in debt. He skipped meals to save money for batteries and motors. Some nights his hands ached so badly he could barely hold a wrench. Yet he never stopped. Whenever exhaustion tempted him to quit, he thought of Emily's smile, of the way her eyes lit up when she imagined her new life. That vision carried him through the long nights. For the first time in years, he didn't feel poor or broken, he felt rich in purpose. Victoria began to see Michael differently. She had met countless men in her wealthy circles, polished, ambitious, powerful, but few with his sincerity. Watching him work reminded her of something she had long forgotten, the beauty of selflessness. One evening, as she stood quietly in the corner, she realized she was holding her breath, afraid to interrupt. The moment, her daughter, once weighed down by silence, was laughing again. Her daughter was dreaming again. And the man responsible was not a doctor, not an engineer, not a billionaire, but a mechanic with nothing to his name but heart. The chair was almost ready. Michael adjusted the final pieces with meticulous care, his fingers trembling not from fatigue, but from anticipation. Emily sat nearby, swinging her arms in excitement, whispering to her mother about all the things she wanted to do once it was finished: go to the park, race down the sidewalk, maybe even join her friends at school. Victoria listened, her chest tightening with both hope and fear. Could this chair truly give Emily back the childhood she had missed? Could it really be as simple as the hands of one determined mechanic? The storm of doubt still lingered in Victoria's heart, but Michael's quiet confidence was unshakable. He never promised perfection, never spoke of miracles. Instead, he let his work speak for him. And with every tightened bolt, every polished wheel, every adjustment made for Emily's comfort, he built not just a wheelchair, but a symbol of second chances. The garage, once filled with dust and despair, now held something priceless, a future waiting to be lived. And though the chair was not yet complete, one truth was already clear: it had already changed them all. The sun rose gently over Charleston that Sunday morning, painting the quiet town in shades of gold and amber. Michael Carter stood in his garage, his hands trembling slightly as he polished the final touches of his creation. The wheelchair gleamed in the morning light, not just a machine, but a masterpiece born of sweat, sacrifice, and compassion. For weeks, this project had consumed him, through sleepless nights and aching muscles, and now the moment of truth had arrived. Outside, the birds sang as though celebrating the dawn of something extraordinary, a new chapter about to unfold for them all. When Victoria and Emily arrived, Michael's heart thudded in his chest. Emily, dressed in a pale yellow dress that matched the morning brightness, looked at the chair with wide, eager eyes. For a moment, she seemed frozen, almost afraid to believe it was real. Michael crouched down, his voice gentle. "It's ready for you, Emily." She nodded, her small hands trembling as she shifted into the seat. The chair adjusted itself automatically, the cushions molding perfectly to her posture. She gasped softly, feeling comfort she had never experienced before. It was as if the chair had been waiting just for her. Michael switched on the system and gave her a nod. Emily pressed the small control on the armrest, and the chair glided forward with smooth precision. Her eyes widened, her laughter echoing through the garage. She turned the chair easily, the wheels moving without resistance, the design effortless and free. It wasn't just movement, it was liberation. For the first time in her life, she felt like she wasn't trapped by her own body. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "It's perfect." And in that whisper was years of silent prayers, finally answered. Her laughter soon turned into tears of joy as she spun the chair gracefully, stopping only to throw her arms around Michael. The hug was tight, filled with gratitude words could never express. "You changed my life," she whispered into his ear, her voice breaking. Michael held her gently, blinking rapidly to keep his own emotions from spilling over. He had built cars, engines, and machines before, but nothing had ever mattered like this. Nothing had ever made him feel this alive. In that moment, he realized the chair wasn't just for Emily. It was for every child who had ever been told hope was out of reach. Victoria stood nearby, her hand covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. For years she had carried the weight of watching her daughter struggle, of watching her joy fade away with every failed promise from experts who only saw Emily as a patient, not as a child. But now, standing in this humble garage, she saw her daughter glowing, laughing, alive again. She stepped forward, her elegant figure trembling with emotion, and placed a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder. "You didn't just give her mobility," she said, her voice choked with tears. "You gave us back our family." Michael lowered his head, overwhelmed. He hadn't thought of it that way. He never worked for recognition, only for the chance to help. But hearing those words filled him with a warmth that no paycheck, no award, no fame could ever equal. He looked at Emily, her face radiant with joy, and then at Victoria, whose eyes shone with something deeper than gratitude. He realized then that his life, once marked by hardship and loneliness, had found its meaning in this act of compassion. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a struggling mechanic. He felt like someone who mattered. The morning stretched on, filled with laughter and disbelief. Emily raced around the driveway, her delighted cries echoing through the neighborhood. Neighbors peeked out from their porches, curious about the scene unfolding before them. Some stopped in their tracks, watching as the little girl who was usually seen being carefully carried now moved freely, her joy impossible to ignore. Michael leaned against his old truck, exhaustion tugging at his body, but pride filling his soul. Victoria walked up beside him, her hands folded tightly as if holding onto a thought too precious to let slip. Finally she spoke. "I want to give you something in return." Michael shook his head instantly. "You don't have to. I didn't do this for anything." But Victoria raised her hand to stop him. "Please, let me finish," she said firmly. This isn't charity. This is about what the world needs. She took a breath, her voice steady but full of feeling. I'm opening a foundation for children with disabilities, something bigger than I ever dreamed before. And I want you to run the engineering division. Your invention shouldn't just change Emily's life, it should change thousands more. Her words hung in the air like a promise of a future too bright to imagine. Michael was stunned. For years, he'd been just a man fixing cars, scraping by to survive another day. The thought of leading an engineering division, of using his skills to change lives on such a scale, felt almost impossible. He opened his mouth to protest, but when he looked at Emily still laughing, still moving freely, he realized this was no dream. This was real, his midnight act of kindness, born from nothing but love for a stranger's child, had opened a door to a destiny far greater than he had ever imagined for himself. As the golden sunlight bathed the mansion grounds, the three of them stood together, bound not by money or circumstance, but by something far deeper: compassion. Michael accepted the offer with tears in his eyes, his voice breaking as he whispered, "If I can give hope to even one more child like Emily, then my life has been worth it." Victoria squeezed his hand tightly, silently acknowledging the rare kind of heart she had found in him. And Emily, watching them both, smiled with a joy so pure it seemed to light up the entire world. In the weeks that followed, the story of the mechanic and the little girl spread across Charleston, then across the state, and eventually across the nation. News outlets reported on the invention, amazed by the man who had built something groundbreaking in a garage with nothing but determination. Families from all over reached out to Victoria's new foundation, desperate for the same miracle for their own children. And at the heart of it all stood Michael Carter, not a millionaire, not a doctor, but a man whose kindness had changed everything. For Michael, it was never about the fame or the recognition that suddenly flooded his life. It was about Emily's laughter, about Victoria's tears of relief, about the families who finally saw hope where there had been none. Each new wheelchair he designed carried with it the memory of that first golden morning, when one little girl whispered, "You changed my life." And every time he heard those words from another child, he felt the same surge of purpose that had kept him working through those endless nights. He knew now that kindness could ripple farther than he had ever believed. And so, the mechanic who once struggled to survive became the man who helped others truly live. His garage became a hub of innovation, his name whispered with gratitude by families he had never met, and his story retold as proof that one act of compassion could indeed change the world. For Emily and Victoria, life had shifted forever, not just because of mobility gained, but because of love restored. Together, they had found hope where none had been promised. And as the golden sun dipped that evening, Michael Carter stood quietly, his heart full, knowing that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could create a legacy eternal.